Welcome, friends, to our last session at International Webinars celebrating the Mother's and Auroville's birth anniversary. Today is Auroville's birthday, the birthday of the city of dawn, the city of Sri Aurobindo, the cradle of the Superman, the man of the future. Let us come together in a moment of silence. Thank you. Today is a profound topic of spiritual education. And we are very happy and honored to have with us today the distinguished guests and eminent speakers, Vamadeva, David Frawley, Ameeta Mehra, Aravindan Neelakandan, Janak Khandwala. Welcome all to this session. Spiritual education is the crown of all educations, as we know. And to achieve it, all the parts of our being are to be purified and united around our innermost center. In integral yoga, the spiritual transformation of our consciousness follows the psychic transformation, which implies that the contact with the divine on the individual level is to be achieved first, whereas the spiritual introduces the powers of a vaster universal consciousness, the realization of the dynamic Brahman, in the words of Sri Aurobindo. In the words of Isha Upanishad, Yastu sarvani bhutani atman yevano pashyati sarva bhuteshu chatmanam. The one who sees all beings in oneself and oneself in all beings, tatona vijugupsate, and is not shrinking from that, is not hiding away from that, not wanting to run away. He is realized being in spiritual sense. How to arrive at such a spiritual realization of oneness is the task and the aim of spiritual education. So without further ado, allow me to briefly introduce our distinguished panelists. First speaker is Vamadeva. He doesn't need any introduction in the circles of Indology and studies of yoga, and especially among Sri Aurobindo circles. David Frawley is a Vedic teacher and educator who is the author of over 40 books. He is the founder and director of the American Institute of Vedic Studies, Veda.com, which offers online courses and publications on Ayurveda, yoga, Vedanta, mantra, and meditation, and even Vedic astrology. He is a rare doctorate. He has a rare doctorate in literature in yoga, and is a recipient of the prestigious Padma Bhushan Award, one of India's highest civilian awards for distinguished service of a higher order. His work is highly respected in traditional circles in India also, as well as influential in the West, where he is involved in many Vedic and yogic schools, ashrams, and associations. And just before the webinar, we spoke about this. He spoke that he is connected with ashram, with Sri Aurobindo Society, with many Aurobindonian circles and centers. So welcome, Vamadeva, to our session, and please address the audience. And later I will introduce other speakers.
Namaste, Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Thank you for that kind and wonderful introduction. I'm very happy to be with all of you today on this important occasion and as part of this week-long series of webinars and discussions, which is greatly needed not only for Auroville, but for the entire world today. And also as part of the 150th anniversary of Sri Aurobindo's birth and the 75th anniversary of the independence of Bharat, India, these August 15th events. As someone who works with Jyotish and numerology, I would like to let you know that this is the 54th anniversary of the founding of Auroville. And 54 is half of the sacred number of 108, which is, of course, the use of the mala and the various other sacred numbers, even astrologically, connections between sun, moon, and earth. But it means Auroville is halfway on its spiritual journey to the 108, or the fullness of knowledge and expression and manifestation. We are also, of course, in a very difficult time for humanity, with much struggle at various levels, not only in the outer realms, but in the inner realms. So Auroville has a very important place to play. And relative to education, education has been the most important thing for human life, particularly, we could say, spiritual education. And it's very important that Auroville takes up this educational task in terms of Vedic and yogic knowledge, which Sri Aurobindo covered in such a vast, intricate, profound, and original way in his writings, starting with Rig Veda, going through all this Mahabharata, Gita, Ramayana, all aspects of the traditions of yoga, jnana, bhakti, karma, all aspects of the traditions, Puranas, Tantra. So Sri Aurobindo's teachings are a vast compendium of the yogic and Vedic knowledge in India, and centered in a dynamic new supramental vision for the future of India and for the future of humanity. And the mother has given us wonderful statements and practical guidelines on every aspect of life, relative to meditation, relative to dealing with emotions, relative to the social realm. We also have there Sri Aurobindo's letters on yoga. So these are extremely important as a resource. And it's very important that this educational process that Sri Aurobindo set in motion continues to grow and expand. He also embraced all the Vedic sciences, the Sanskrit language, and we emphasize an integral approach to Vedic and yogic knowledge. And this means integral application of the Vedic sciences, which we have been involved with, all aspects of yoga, Raja, Hatha, Jnana, Bhakti, Karma, etc., all teachings of Vedanta, every aspect of Ayurveda for body, mind, and consciousness, Jyotish, Vastu, Sanskrit, even all the traditional music and dance, but put also in a modern and original thought, language, approach, teaching, which Sri Aurobindo has done, providing us a terminology and a practical experience and a dialogue, debate, and understanding of all the teachings of the world in light of the higher knowledge that Sri Aurobindo represents and connects us to through the Vedas. I have been involved in Sri Aurobindo's teachings since 1970. And at that time of my studies, he was perhaps the most important influence that gave me the broader view of Vedic knowledge, yoga, tantra, etc. And I had simply come upon his work by chance as a young person in Denver, Colorado. And most specifically, through the Life Divine, I understood his vast teachings about humanity. And through his books on the Rig Veda, including Hymns to the Mystic Fire, I also came in contact with the Vedic world. I never heard of the Vedas until I saw the quotes in the Life Divine. And I took his book on the Rig Veda. I remember reading it strangely on a bus coming back from Canada. And I had an epiphany of the Vedic dawns. And so all my Vedic work was based upon my connection with his teaching. And so, and then the second event that was very crucial for me is I began some research in Vedic text. I did a series of translations of Rig Veda, Yajurveda, Upanishads, actually quite a bit. This is probably close to 1,000 pages. And I wondered, what could I possibly do with them? And this was at a time in the late 70s when MP Pandit was coming to America. So I visited with him and showed him my work. I had no expectations because I wasn't an academic and I wasn't any official ashram member. And he encouraged me in that work and began publishing my works for the Sri Aurobindo Ashram, World Union, Advent, and other works back in 1980. And they did quite a bit of that for several years. He brought out some of my first books in India. So I would say without the knowledge of Sri Aurobindo and the connection with him, or the connection with MP Pandit, who was also the secretary of the mother, my work would have gone nowhere. He told me to follow out this Vedic mission, and I have done that since. So with that background, I wanted to get to our specific topic, which is spiritual education. And I would like to define that a little bit differently in a more Indian sense. First of all, we would call it the Adhyatmic education. Adhyatma relative to the inner self, or more specifically, Atma Vidya, the knowledge of the true self, which is behind and beyond body and mind, which are its instruments, which pervades the entire universe as the Chitakasha, or the space of consciousness, and which is the basis of all creation manifestation, as also which transcends it and is one with Brahman, the cosmic transcendent reality. So Atma Vidya always implies Brahma Vidya, and in Upanishads, Vedantic text, we have more specific vidyas like Sadvidya, knowledge of being, a knowledge relative to Om, so many things. Om is the basis that arises from Pranava, from Atma, Brahman. So the Vedic knowledge is inherent in the cosmic mind. It is not something that comes from human beings. And the Sanskrit language is a manifestation of that. I like to say this because the term spirituality is a very diffuse term in the Western world and means different things to different people. And as we say, yogic spirituality is an individual affair and a connection to the self within, an exploration of mind, consciousness, self, reality, the entire universe. So it must have that experiential dimension of sadhana. It is not just simply study of a particular subject, of philosophy, or some ancient tradition. It is a study of our self nature. And I would say on top of that, that yoga is, in the proper sense, is the practice of this Atma Vidya or Adhyatma Vidya, relative to the individual, but also relative to all aspects of the being. Sometimes we say Veda is the knowledge and yoga is the practice. And these, of course, are slightly different definitions than what most people understand. And Vedic approach is integral, 7 levels of speech, 4 aspects of speech, looking at the world, the individual connection of Purusha as cosmic and also individual. Approach is inherently integral, but there is always the tendency, if not the need of the human mind, to go from one side or one piece or one specialization at a time. And the human being is a complex being in that we have an inner immortal core of pure consciousness, but we also have our panchakoshas, we have the different levels and aspects of the reality. And the Atma Vidya requires this inner purification to approach. You cannot just jump into self-realization or unity with the divine. It is not a theoretical program and is not an activity of the ordinary mind. So purification of the being, Deha Shuddhi, purification of the body, Prana Shuddhi, purification of the prana, and also overall Chitta Shuddhi, or sometimes it's said Chitta Prasadana, Chitta Shodhana, purification of the Chitta or the mind, which is largely taking it to a sattvic state from the Rajas and Tamas. In Ayurveda, we teach Rajas and Tamas are the doshas or the disease-causing factors at the level of the mind, which then disturb the physical doshas, Vata, Pitta, Kapha, at an outer level. So sattvic foundation is necessary. And the other point I would like to bring in relative to Sri Aurobindo's yoga is that he comes to the aspirant asking for the highest aspiration. He often says, our yoga begins with a complete silence, stillness, and surrender and openness to the inner being. That is the definition of yoga at the highest level, a Raja Yoga, we might say, an integral yoga, and is not just the kind of outer yoga we have today. Today, yoga has been caught up more in methods, sequences, techniques, and outer practices, which are important and can help with these purification that we have mentioned. But the inner yoga works through direct surrender or direct self-knowledge, direct connection to the divine within. If you have that inner connection with the Yoga Shakti, with the Divine Mother's energy, then that carries you along. It's not necessarily simply to follow a formula. And the other point I would like to bring out here is the terrible and very unfortunate failure of education in the modern world that is getting progressively worse, that has extended itself through most of academia, because there is no concept, much less practice, of Atma Vidya, these Adhyatmic approaches, the integral view of yoga, a view of humanity beyond the physical, but also a future of humanity taking us to the highest divine knowledge and manifestation. Instead, academia is infested with every sort of politics, ego, and outer influences. And so there is a lot of confusion as to education. And the other point I would like to bring in here, it's even more so relative to the youth, because the human mind needs to have proper education. And this is not just a matter of technology and information. And one of the things we have to recognize is how the mind works. One simple rule is the mind imitates its learning environment and its environment as a whole. So if our learning environment is a screen, a computer, or outer knowledge of data and information, that is what the mind becomes a computer. It regurgitates information rather than having direct knowledge or direct experience, such as Sri Aurobindo mentioned. He said when the great yogis came together, they didn't ask about what you know, what your information is, what your title is. They asked about what have you seen, what have you realized in your own consciousness, and what is transmitted through direct awareness and even inner silence, as in Upanishads, which transcends speech and mind. So there's not we go to schools throughout the world. Where do you find yoga, Ayurveda, Vedic sciences taught, apart from a few special institutions in India? Those of us who have taken these up have had to do so at an individual level, going to India. And of course, we now have private groups who have set up many institutions teaching these things globally, although often we've had to scale down our teachings to what is possible to teach in the current context. So we see this failure of education is even increasing, and then it's also connected with the distortions in the media. Sometimes I say that the world is said to be Maya, but the media is the Maya of the Maya. And like the other things, it's pre-digesting your experience and telling you what you see and how to see it. It can make the cup half full or half empty. And it can promote a lot of mass emotions. Today, we even see fear, panic, all these things coming through the media. So the minds of people are also being caught up in the outer media. It has a place. It can be used properly. And sometimes it is. We have to honor that. But for inner knowledge, we must go beyond all outer media. Upanishads say we have the five senses looking outwardly, and so we miss lurking within. Today, we not only have five senses, we have any number of outer media instruments that are bombarding us with stimuli from the outside. And so we don't know how to look within. And our children are now so conditioned, they don't even know there is an inner way of viewing. So Adhyatma Vidya requires turning the consciousness, turning the awareness within. So it's not just a matter of what we learn, that should include all the spiritual and yogic subjects. It's also a matter of how we learn. And true learning requires a power of attention and dharana shakti, which requires of course, a certain sattvic living in terms of principles for body, senses, and mind, and also some degree of control of the body and senses and prana and mind, which is also not being taught. And so what this means is to really deeply understand, you need a power of attention that you can hold to a single subject for some time. Minutes, perhaps hopefully hours. Our attention power now is about milliseconds, less than a second. And we're so stimulating us and the children with these outer stimuli that the power of attention is going. We have so many attention disorders coming out in education and in Western medicine. We have depression coming up. What is depression? It comes from having too much stimuli going on until you're overly stimulated and burnt out. So besides teaching the ideas and principles of yoga, there needs to be teaching of the yogic way of learning and education. And this also requires personal learning, learning from a teacher, learning in a tradition. It's not just a question of meditating, but what are you meditating on? It is not just a question of pranayama, but what are you holding in your prana? So my vision of Auroville that I would like to share in closing is that Auroville becomes a center of Vedic education, the higher yoga of Sri Aurobindo, that education becomes one of, if not perhaps its primary focus, and an education that is shared not only with everyone in Auroville and everyone under the guidance of Sri Aurobindo, but with the entire world, with yoga groups everywhere, often who don't know much about Sri Aurobindo, with all aspects of learning. Sri Aurobindo has great teachings for science, for medicine, and even, of course, the history of humanity and the awakening of India as Bharat for reclaiming its yogic and Vedic and Rishi heritage. Of course, I've written on how the history books need to be changed, myth of Aryan invasion. The inspiration for doing that also came through Sri Aurobindo and the teachings that he gave and the connections with Pandit and many others in that field, Sethna and Jagan Mohan, and going back to the Sanskrit text, and Kapali Shastri, who I was also connected through Kavyakanta Ganapati Muni. So that is my vision for Auroville, and it's very important for this 75th anniversary of India's independence and 150th anniversary of Sri Aurobindo and Sri Aurobindo and the Mother's teaching. So let's form a sankalpa today to elevate Auroville to a place of a true school of integral yoga and integral Vedic knowledge, not only outwardly in terms of schools, institutions, publications, and webinars, but also inwardly in our own consciousness, in our inner heart, in the cosmic mind, in the earth consciousness, so that we as humanity can overcome the terrible challenges we have today and learn to master our new technology for the evolution of consciousness and the unfoldment of a supramental being, of a true human being who embraces the entire universe and understands the divine self within and is working for the divine manifestation of the divine on all levels. So again, I thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak. I welcome our other speakers, my friend Aravindan Neelakandan. He's a very great voice for India today, who I've been honored to be associated with, and all of you today. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha, Hari Om Tat Sat.
Thank you, Dr. David Frawley, for your inspirational speech. It's very needed for us, especially nowadays in Auroville, when there is a search for resurgence or for new beginning, to follow the vision of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother, of a higher knowledge, of Adhyatmic knowledge, of Atma Vidya. Auroville was created for that purpose. Thank you for encouragement and kind words. And now I would love to invite Ameeta Mehra. She is not feeling totally well, and so she will be speaking to us only through audio. I will just project her photo for us to see. And welcome, Ameeta.
A very good evening, and thank you for inviting me today. I'm sorry I'm unable to put on the video. I've got a bout of flu, but because it was Auroville's birthday, I felt I would really like to make a small offering, so I will be short. On a few important points that I myself have felt are important when we are considering how to move towards a spiritual education. The first point I'd like to just mention is the role of the teacher. The role of the teacher, or the mentor, or the guide, or the guru, whatever word one uses in the modern language, is extremely important when it comes to a spiritual education or an education of the spirit. Normally, the role of the teacher is of an instructor, and often it is mental. The second role that Sri Aurobindo speaks, there are three stages, he said. There are teachers, and each one is of a higher kind. He talks about instruction as being the first level of teaching. The second, he said, is influence. When the teacher or the mentor becomes, in his consciousness, psychicized, and due to his own development of consciousness, influences the student or those around him in a psychic inner way, where the student becomes open to the psychic atmosphere of the teacher. And the third, which is the highest level of teaching and learning, is contagion. So these three levels of instruction, influence, and contagion. And when we come to contagion, we come to the spiritual aspect of living and learning and education. Because then what happens is that when you're in touch with your guide or with the mentor or with the instructor, you become completely absorbed in the spiritual atmosphere of his being. And one can only think of the example of Sri Aurobindo himself, those who came to him to study, in the early days, Nalini Kanta Gupta, so many, they immediately started imbibing and becoming open to his yogic force, and that is the force of contagion. Now, these three, you can see just by my mentioning these three, we are obviously, as Dr. Frawley said, very much on the mental instructive level in our present education process and system today in the world. Influence is there, but it is only of certain people and teachers. And then, of course, the contagion is very, very seldom found. So the importance of the teacher and the guide is extremely important when we are considering a spiritual education. Who are your mentors? Who are the teachers? What is their state of consciousness? And how do they influence the student? And therefore, it's very important. One of the first things we did when we started the Gnostic Center, we started teacher education programs. We said, look, this is the key. The key to education, a new education, is a new teacher, is a new guide, is a mentorship. And it's important then to develop those so that they can then become harbingers of this integral education. The second point I'd like to make is the importance in the mother's yoga of the synthesis of spirit and matter. Often what happens is when we talk about spiritual education, we talk about an education obviously of the spirit and of the unfoldment of the soul and the higher faculties and knowledge and so on, the purification of the being. But we most often in schools and colleges and even institutions that are teaching spiritual education forget about, or rather denigrate or do not give enough importance to the material aspect of the body and of matter. So it is one to the exclusion of the other. And because of this exclusive attitude that has arisen in India due to this dichotomy between matter and spirit, we find that either there are people who are going towards the higher realms of knowledge and the spiritual dimensions, and then consider matter as something that is to be just, dealt with and organized, but not really perfected. Or we are going to the most material way of life, vital material life, which of course you see mostly in society today. Now, the mother had something very, very important to say about that, which I find extremely important when we talk about spiritual education, and this is where I want to bring in Auroville. Auroville, for me, is an experiment that really is, talks about unending, lifelong, continuous education. And because it talks about this, it is constantly embedded in matter. Now, when you're embedded in matter, when you're trying to create something beautiful in the physical world, whether it is a city, whether it's your own body, whether it is an institution or a business or products, it could be anything. How do you infuse and bring this matter and spirit together? And this is where the whole problem lies, because that is when one has to deal with ego, desires, ambition, greed, and all the things that in life take us away from the spirit. And for that, the mother has some wonderful, wonderful things to say. In fact, when I started reading about psychic and spiritual education in the book on education by the mother, I was stunned. I was astonished by what she wrote. There was nothing on these what should I say? One expected that one would talk about the spiritual knowledge, bringing down of the higher consciousness, and meditation and contemplation and all that. But she goes into a completely different realm. I want to read out a few things just to make one understand how important the smallest things in life is. And she starts by saying, become conscious. Become conscious of yourself. Become conscious of your day. Become conscious of your life. Become conscious of your habits. Start observing yourself. So she talks about self-observation, self-organization, and self-reflection. Now, these three things have a very deep importance in our education today. And these are attitudes or processes that can be taught in our schools and in our colleges. They can be integrated in whatever subjects we learn. There does not need to be a dichotomy between the two. So when she talks about a spiritual education, she says very, very beautifully, the starting point, and I'm here quoting her, the starting point is to seek in yourself that which is independent of the body and circumstances of your life, which is not born of the mental formation that you've been given, the language you speak, the habits and customs of the environment in which you live, the country where you are born, or the age to which you belong. You must find in the depths of your being that which carries in it the sense of universality, limitless expansion, termless continuity, and so on. Then she says, when you start doing that, you think in their thoughts, vibrate in their sensations, the barriers separating individuals from each other's break down. And then what seemed inert suddenly becomes full of life. Stones quicken, plants feel and will and suffer. Animals speak in a language more or less inarticulate, but clear and expressive. Everything is animated with a marvelous consciousness without time and limit. And this is only one aspect of the psychic realization. So the mothers very, very much in the chapter on psychic and spiritual education spent far more time on the importance of developing the psychic, which she felt it was through the psychic that one could go towards a spiritual education. So the importance of bringing the psychic forward, of listening to oneself, of expanding one's consciousness. And then, after a few lines, she says something very interesting. She says, the first and perhaps the most important is that the mind is incapable of judging spiritual things. So then she says, give up all personal seeking for comfort, satisfaction, enjoyment, or happiness. Be only a burning fire for progress. Take whatever comes to you as a help for progress and make at once the progress required. And so on. And then she goes on, never get excited, nervous, or agitated. Remain perfectly quiet in the face of all circumstances. Now, these are spiritual poisons. This is what a spiritual education will teach us and needs to be incorporated in the curriculum of our schools and our universities and our and all our learning institutions. It is not just the mental study or the knowledge of the higher, but it is the practical living of it. The idea to establish samatha, equanimity, equality, the whole poise of the being, never complain of the behavior of anyone. Now, that's very difficult. We always criticize other people and we never see our own faults. So never complain of the behavior of anyone unless you have the power to change in his nature what makes him act like that. Now, this is, and then she goes on, before you go to bed, concentrate a few seconds in the aspiration that the sleep may restore your fatigued nerves, bring to your brain calmness and quietness, that on waking up with you wake up with a renewed vigor, begin again your journey on the path of the great discovery. And she continues on for the next 2-3 pages. Now, what I find extremely striking in what she's saying is this is in the chapter of spiritual education, the very, very basic way of living. And I wanted to end with 3 or 4 other thoughts. One was the importance of surrender. Dr. Frawley briefly touched upon it, but in Sri Aurobindo and the mother's, sadhana, for the spiritual, towards the spiritual education or spiritual life, it is the most important thing that Sri Aurobindo wrote is, a vast surrender was his only strength. The importance of self-giving and surrender for the higher consciousness to come into the being and take up the lower consciousness and bring it forward and purify it and change it. And lastly, I wanted to dwell a little bit about the new, work that we've all been doing. In the 150th year of Sri Aurobindo's birth anniversary, we have created an Sri Aurobindo integral network, Sri Aurobindo integral education network. And I think these kinds of works where centers all around the world, 48 centers and 103 scholars have come together to create programs and courses in all fields of life, not just so-called spiritual, but even in science and in physics and management, besides, of course, the studies of the Vedas, the Upanishads, the Gita, and so on, and Sri Aurobindo's books. How do you apply Sri Aurobindo's ideas and his philosophy or his light in life? How do you apply Mother's consciousness and that force, the new force, in everyday life, whether it is in doing organic agriculture, living, working with animals, running a business, every single thing. And I think that is the challenge that we have before us. And I can only say that from my own experience of designing courses, programs, and starting the Gnostic Center of Education, which we did. In fact, this is 28th of March is the 25th birth anniversary of the Gnostic Center. I can only say that the things that have helped most in being able to integrate matter and spirit, and in bringing these spiritual principles and practices into the curriculum of education, in terms of in every subject, the 3 or 4 practices that we have consciously adopted in all our programs are: 1, self-observation, self-reflection, contemplation, becoming conscious, and self-direction in study. If the student is given the freedom to research and the freedom to develop his own mind and his own consciousness through a research project where he directs or she directs her own learning, and the guide is there just so to help that that student to become, to deepen and to reflect and to observe and to become more conscious. I think this is the starting point of a new education, which could then develop into perhaps what the mother wanted, a university of tomorrow, a new education for a new world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ameeta, for this wonderful exposition of the vision by the mother, what spiritual education may mean to us and what we have to do in this regard. We have with us today Honorable Lieutenant Governor of Pondicherry. So welcome, Madam. So would you like to say a few words before we continue on the hour panel? Please unmute yourself.
My dear Aurovillians, friends of Auroville, 54 years ago, on 28 February 1968, the mother inaugurated Auroville. She read out the Auroville Charter and the galaxy plan of the Auroville Township was on display. In brief, Auroville would be a place where the relations among human beings, usually based almost exclusively upon competition and strife, would be replaced by relations of emulation for doing better, for collaboration, relations of real brotherhood. Honorable Prime Minister Sri Narendra Modi ji visited Auroville on 25/2/2018. In his address to Auroville residents, he stated, among other things, Indian society is fundamentally diverse. It has fostered dialogue and a philosophic tradition. Auroville showcases this ancient Indian tradition to the world by bringing together global diversity. India has always allowed mutual respect and coexistence of different religions and cultures. India is home to the age-old tradition of Gurukul, where learning is not confined to classrooms, where life is a living lab. Auroville too has developed as a place of unending and lifelong education. Honorable Prime Minister concluded his inspiring address with the following aspirational statements. May Auroville continue to come up with ideas to empower the ordinary citizens of this country. May people from far and wide bring with them new ideas. May Auroville become the center where these ideas are synthesized. May Auroville serve as a beacon to the world. May it be the guardian which calls for breaking down the narrow walls of the mind. May it continue to invite everyone to celebrate the possibilities of humanity's oneness. May the spirit of Maharishi Sri Aravindo and Divine Mother continue to guide Auroville to the eventual fulfillment of its lofty founding vision. The current year 2022 marks the 150th anniversary of Sri Aravindo, who was born on August 15, 1872. Sri Aravindo's work on human psyche, he describes the conditions for the coming of a spiritual age as follows. Therefore, if spiritual change of which we have been speaking is to be effected, it must unite two conditions which have to be simultaneously satisfied but are most difficult to bring together. There must be the individual and the individuals who are able to see, to develop, to recreate themselves in the image of the spirit and to communicate both their idea and its power to the mass. And there must be at the same time a mass, a society, a communal mind, or at least the constituents of group body, the possibility of a group soul, which is capable of receiving and effectively assimilating, ready to follow and effectively arrive, not compelled by its own inherent deficiencies, its defect of preparation to stop on the way or fall back before the decisive change is made. Let Aurobindo contribute to the creation of these conditions and as such become an accelerator of the transition to a spiritual age. Let us build the Aurobindo township with a sense of urgency and resolve and welcome many more persons of goodwill who wish to contribute to making the mother's dream a reality. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam Governor. Thank you very much. And you are also part of the governing board of Aurobindo Foundation. And so we hope and rely on your support and development of Aurobindo. Thank you. And now I would like to invite Shri Aravindan Neelakandan, who has a degree in psychology and worked with Natural Resources Development Project of Vivekananda Kendra in Kanyakumari for a decade, and now is contributing editor of Swarajya. Please, Aravindan, address the audience. You have to unmute yourself.
So when we talk about the spiritual education, we naturally mean that spiritual education is an education that is qualitatively different from other sorts of education. Now, let me start with the story that we are all very familiar with in India, and all people who are familiar with Indian culture would be familiar with this story about Prahalada. Prahalada learned the Atma Vidya, or the name of Hari, when he was in the womb of his mother. When he was getting all the nourishment, the biological nourishment that he was getting in his womb of the mother, he also got this particular aspect. It was an organic education that he got. Later, when he goes out, he becomes a child, he has an imposed education on him from his father Hiranyakasipu, who is kind of a person whom one could describe as a monopolistic person. A person who views the world in terms of binaries, in terms of specific categories. A person who cannot see the linking areas of any binaries. So that kind of a person, he creates an educational system, and this boy is put into that educational system. And yet he is able to resist that educational system. In fact, in the folk traditional rendering of Prahalada's story, we are shown that the boy actually transforms this particular education system. And this story has a kernel of truth. And this kernel of truth is expressed by Sri Aurobindo in 3 principles that he told about education. One is that nothing can be taught, and the teacher has to be a helper rather than an instructor. So this is almost similar to what Swami Vivekananda said, that education is bringing out the divinity that is already there in man, already there in the human being. The second principle is that the mind has to be consulted in its own growth. And if we are going to shape a child's psychology, the psychic being, through our own ideas, then Sri Aurobindo uses a very strong term for that. It's barbarous and ignorance superstition. And the third principle of education is to work from the near to the far, from that which is to that which shall be, a kind of an evolutionary approach to education. So we see all this together. And this has to be given to the child through a system, though these particular principles defy the system. How do we do that? That is actually the question that we have. Now, when in Swaraj, I specialize in writing popular science articles. So when I read a lot of popular science books, when I read these books, what I find is that the scientists who are very material scientists, who are into the hottest material sciences, say physics or molecular biology or neurobiology, they would take a very strong reductionist approach. When they come out with this complete vision, that vision is actually fulfilling, ennobling, and gives exactly that spiritual feeling that we see through a lot of things. So here we see something that through the hardest of the material sciences, we can reach the most subtle spiritual heights. Something that actually Swami Vivekananda said regarding the material sciences. He took, this is exactly the words of Swami Vivekananda. He said, you take the hardest of the material sciences, astronomy or chemistry, and then go through it very deeply, you will find that the physical melts into the metaphysical. The gross melts into the subtle. And this he was telling when the Newtonian physics was at its height. The double slit experiment would be a few decades later. Yet Swami Vivekananda was able to make this particular, was able to give this particular vision for educating the children, for giving education to ourselves in hard sciences. Now, this is exactly what we need. When we think of spiritual education, the spiritual education has to be something that permeates all the domains, whether the student takes art or whether the student takes science or whether the students take social sciences. This aspect has to permeate the entire existence. And in this, we have to bring in the evolutionary notion. Now, we all know that from the lithosphere and hydrosphere and atmosphere, the biosphere evolved. And from the biosphere, next we moved on to noosphere, which Thail G. Chardin, actually, a Jesuit anthropologist who was also a very great evolutionist, a spiritual person, very great spiritual person, and his books were kind of, he was stopped from publishing those books before his death, and he completely accepted the dictate of the church, and later these books came. It's a very good vision, and he coined this term noosphere. So from biosphere we move on to the noosphere. In fact, there are a lot of similarities. Many people, particularly Setna, has brought out a beautiful book on Thail G. Chardin, and he has compared the vision of Sri Aurobindo and Thail G. Chardin. Now, the point I want to stress here is that such a vision, it hasn't entered our biology textbooks. At the same time, when you hear the lectures of, let us say, an Anil Seth or V.S. Ramachandran or Donald Hoffman, then you feel that these people actually have felt the spiritual essence. Now, the question that really disturbs me is that we have been here, given the plan of integral education, given the plan of spiritual education, and we have not been able to generate this kind of students in our curriculum. What is it that stops us? Have we done a kind of compartmentalization that the spiritual and the physical have been actually divided? Are we just giving, this is a serious question that I'm asking myself actually. What is it that in the Western curriculum is able to create a person like Anil Seth, whereas in India we are not able to create such neuroscientists, such physics. Of course, in physics we have people. One good example that I would like to point out is there was Daulat Kothari, who was actually Daulat Singh Kothari, who was actually the first person to talk about reforms in education. He has written a very beautiful article in the centenary volume of Niels Bohr, and he talks about how complementarity is the basis of entire civilizational dialogue. Complementarity is very essential and it is rooted in Vedantic structure. He talks about it. Sri Aurobindo has talked about this, and yet what we see again and again is that we are not somehow integrating these things into the education. It is in this context. I want to tell that it is not because there are people, not because there are no people there. Actually, there are people there. Yesterday was the birth anniversary of Manoj Das. So Manoj Das was a great storyteller. He comes in the tradition of Sri Aurobindo and Mother. He was in the ashram. He wrote beautiful books for children. And through these books, he was giving us the values of Sri Aurobindo and Mother. I have read his book called Stories of Light and Delight. A book for children in the age group of, let us say, 7 to 10 or 12. When I was a child, I read this and it is still in my mind. There are two girls who collect flowers and they give it to an old man who was blind. He would touch the flowers, the texture of the flowers, and then he would say, oh, you have brought jasmine. That means it is purity of heart. You have brought this particular flower. That means this flower signifies this particular spiritual strength. He says these things. This is part of the story. But actually, what he is doing is, he is opening a small gate for us to look into the world of flowers as seen by Mother Mira Alfasa. That is what he was doing. For a child, he was doing this in a very beautiful way. He is not telling, Mother did this, and so you have to learn these qualities of these flowers or with this, no rote learning. What he is doing is through a flower, through this story. At last he talks about the lotus as the king of consciousness of the Lord. And when you offer this lotus, then your consciousness opens. The whole thing is integrated with story in such a beautiful way. So here is an example of how you can give spiritual education to children. Unfortunately, again, we have not taken this up. I'm not talking about the entire world. I'm talking about, right now, I'm talking specifically about my people in India. We have not taken this to the government schools. We have not integrated the experiments that have been happening to the schools in a way these things will be democratized and taken to the people. Only if we achieve a critical mass number, that is what the ancient India achieved. That is why India was able to perennially create a lot of people who would stand up to the challenges of their time. So right now, we know that there is a civilizational crisis going on. We know that. And in this, Auroville becomes a kind of a springboard, kind of also a substratum to create new ideas. And then it becoming an incubator for these new ideas, it has to take up these ideas and it has to integrate it with the society that is all around. It is in this, in the fruits of these actions that we will be judged. Sri Aurobindo's thoughts will be judged. Mother's vision will be judged, and Auroville's mission also will be judged. So this is what we have to actually achieve. Whether we are teaching evolution, whether we are teaching physics. For example, there is this beautiful poem on electron by Sri Aurobindo, written long back. And when you read this poem, you understand that Sri Aurobindo was able to capture the essential spirit of theoretical physics. The need for the theory of everything and whatever that we are today talking about, he was able to capture the spirit. And if we are able to light this spirit, light this fire in the hearts of the children, then we would have done our job. Whether it is evolution, whether it is psychology, whether it is physics, whether you are teaching them, as the sister told right before me, whether we are teaching them organic farming, whether we are talking to them about the biogas slurry, the microorganisms in the biogas slurry, we can teach them, communicate with them this wonder. Once we have taught them this wonder, then it will take a life of its own. And that, I think, is in essence the real spiritual education that Sri Aurobindo and Mother thought about. We have to carry forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sri Aravindan. Very, very inspiring speech. And yes, it has to come to the academia, to the mainstream of education, these ideas, these achievements and experiments. And now I would like to invite the final panelists of today. And that is Janak Khandwala. Shri Janak Khandwala is Vice President of Silver Oak University, a state private university established in 2019, and today known as the most promising university in the state of Gujarat, with more than 12,000 students. He is also an executive director of Hasmukh Goswami College of Engineering, Apollo Institute of Engineering and Technology, managing trustee of Universal College of Engineering and Technology. Welcome, Janak. So you unmute yourself, please, and address the audience.
Just being a management of the university, I had seen unlimited use of the technology in adverse manner by today's some of the youth, make them in stress and anxiety. If you want to get rid of from all about negative things, we have to impart spiritual education in society and all institutions, whether it is academic institutions or any kind of organization. Basically, spiritual education is the base. It should be considered as a base of all education system. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and all the organizers for giving me to provide this chance and opportunity to deliver such kind of session on spiritual educations. Thank you. Thank you to all the organizers. I am sad to share. First of all, sorry, I would like to share my screen. Sorry. Thank you.
Yes, we see it. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, first of all, I am very sad to share some kind of numbers that 70%, 74% Indians are stressed, according to data by Delhi-based the Center of Healing. According to data by Delhi-based Center of Healing, TCOs, 88% of Indians are in anxiety. According to data by the National Crime Records Bureau, the number of students committed suicide in only year 2020, the number is a very big, that is a 12,526 number. All we are that very much sad to knowing this kind of number. But in order to read off this a big number, we should give more weightage to spiritual education in curriculum at various levels of educations and levels of education systems. If we will introduce spiritual systems or spiritual education from the school levels, it will give more result, because spiritual education is a definition is considered in a very wide manner, because some of the people are restricted to the definition to yoga only, to medicine only, but it is not restricted this spiritual education definition to yoga and medication only. I would like to elaborate what is spiritual education in all of my PPTs. First of all, I would like to share you that something is missing. What is missing? Yeah, sorry. In our society, something is missing. So what is missing? Education should not be limited solely to academic learning. It means that, like our university or all over the institutions, academic institutes are considered that we are delivering an academic syllabus, we are delivering academic sessions, we are giving them engineering. If students is studying in engineering, we want to make them a good engineer, we want to make them good doctor, we want to make them good lawyer. Where is a good human being? If a person may be very good, very expert, and he is having very good expertise in his own field, but the person is not having a very good human being, all the expertise will not be beneficial to the society. And only spiritual education can make a person to a good human being. In our university or in any academic institutions, the expectation is like that the students should be good expert in their own field. He should be having good core knowledge. He must be having good human beings. He must be patriotic to his nations. And he must be having good spiritual educations. And all of the things is only can be done by only spiritual educations. I myself also planning to introduce spiritual education in my university, in Silverock University, to make them stress-free and improve happiness among the society. I would like to quote the statement of our Union Education and Skill Development Minister, Mr. Dharmendra Pradhan. Education is not competition to acquire degree, but tool to leverage knowledge for character building. Whenever, wherever you are working after acquiring a degree, it is important that who you are, how you are dealing with the people, and especially how you are dealing with people who are at your lower hierarchy. The good human being is considered that he should be work or he should be treat each and every person, whether him or she may be in lower or higher hierarchy. Then and only then he is considered as a good human being, and it can be only done by the spiritual educations. Spiritual educations is required for character development, controlling the emotions, learning how to build and manage the relationship, and developing the higher consequences. I would like to elaborate all these words because these all a single word can elaborate to a single book of 200 to 300 pages. These are very wide subject. Today's many youth, we can see that many of the youth are frustrated. Why they are frustrated? Because they don't get what they want according to themselves. Because they have set some hierarchy, they have set some level. And if they are not getting this or they are not reaching to that point, they got frustrated. They are not able to control their emotions. Easily they are frustrated. They don't have any self-control. The lack of spiritual education, they are not able to manage the relationship, because one person has to deliver the many roles. In office, he is an employee. When he reaches to his home, he is a son of his father. He is a father of his son. He is a husband of his wife. So he has to manage all these things. And here, my friend, spiritual educations will work. Because of this kind of not having the understanding, today you can see more and more divorces are happened. That is because of lack of spiritual educations. Now, what is spiritual educations? Education that makes a person aware of his or her true self. In our Gujarati, we can say, "Potani jatne olkho." Who am I? What I want? To be with yourself. मैं गुजराती में कहिए છે ઘણી વખત. I know many of the people are not knowing Gujarati, but it's a simple sentence. કે તમે તમારી જાત સાથે કેટલો સમય વિતાવો છો. How much time you are spent with your own self. This is a real time that you have enjoyed. Gives a purpose to student. Gives sense of discrimination of right and wrong. Because this discrimination must be there in each of the mind, that this work should not be done by me. This kind of negative thing I cannot do. This kind of positive thing that I have to do. Because whatever the things that we are doing, first I have to ask to ourselves that whether I am right or I am wrong. And the sense only came by the spiritual educations. Your knowledge, your expertise is only able or only necessary when it is useful to your society. If a doctor is very good doctor is there, but he is not ready to help any a single person or any a helping person, the person who wants really help of his medical knowledge, then what is the need of that kind of medical knowledge? The real expert is who helps the society. The sense of responsibility. The students must be having the sense of his responsibility, that my parents are doing lots of expenses towards my studies, so I should be a very good student. I have to score the marks. In our house, the father is also having the responsibility that I have to run the family of 3 to 4 people. So for that kind of expenses that I have to face, so according to their expectations, I have to earn. So this sense of responsibility will only come by the spiritual educations. According to Moxley, being spiritual is about being fully human being, integrating all the energies that are part of being human, about interconnections of forces that gives a meaning to our life. Now, especially I am talking about my university or my field, that what is spiritual education or what is spirituality in higher educations. Because education is a key factor for social, economical, cultural, and political development of human societies. It plays a critical role in a human capital educations. The competent and the effective education system in each country helps significantly to the country's growth and development, because ultimately your development is ended to the country's growth and country's development. A good higher educational system should have the philosophy to contribute to a better spiritual, academic, and professional development of individuals. Here I am not talking about only of the academic institutions or beneficiary to our universities. The spiritual educations is also helping is each and every sectors. Like it can be helpful to the corporate sectors, it can be helpful to the manufacturers, it can be helpful to the service sectors, etc. Each and everywhere, if the employee is having with the spirituality, will be able to deliver more and more. He will be loyal to his organization, he will be loyal to his country, he will be loyal to himself, because it is an important thing that he must be loyal to himself also. because these kind of spiritual educations can improve results and qualities. Higher education institutions have an important responsibility in transmitting spiritual values through education activities with specific student-centered philosophy. In addition, workplace spirituality in higher education has a good impact on teaching effectiveness, academic overall performance, organization performance, and institutional loyalty that I had earlier said. It is useful to the student, middle person, staff, and faculties, employer, all will be beneficial. Creating an appropriate academic environment which will enhance students' spiritual growth is very important regarding creation of new generations who are more globally aware, more altruistic, and more committed to the social justice. Because these kind of people, they will see if they will find anything is being to injustice, they will surely protest. They will protest against any injustice in society. This kind of confidence, these kind of things, these kind of emotions will only come by the spirituality. If I talk about India, then since era, India has been blessed with some of the greatest spiritual and moral minds of the world, and their lessons in the making of man and his conditions to be a better citizens of India and of a world is worth emulating. This sum of our Mahavir, Buddha, our Aravindo, our latest is our Abdul Kalam. There are so many names are there. They were using this spirituality philosophy, this spirituality philosophy, because they were knowing it. And what was the benefit of the spirituality? Because of this, they are using these kind of spiritual educations in the era. We have to bring about a paradigm shift in our education system built on the fundamental pillars of access, equality, quality, affordability, and the accountability. These sentence I have taken from our national or new education policy draft, which was been published in 2019. It should be access to each and everyone. No one should be stopped. Equity. Everyone should be allowed. All are considered to be equal. Quality. Quality should be maintained. It should be at some level. Affordability. It should be affordable to each and every person who want to get it. And accountability. Whatever you are doing, it should be accountable. So all these things, we must not just stop at the right competence and capabilities, but also create the right conducive and vibrant atmosphere for both the teacher and the taught, wherein they complement each other beyond the books to the realms of moralistic and spiritual mentoring. If I am quoting the sloka of Bhagavad Gita, in English I would like to say, a truly educated person does not make any distinction between species or people. It can only be possible by spirituality. Now let's look at the few qualities that spiritual education will give to the students. If these qualities are developed in students, then the faith and happiness, because whatever we are doing, that is for getting the happiness for the ourselves and the happiness for the society. For the face of the happiness index of the society will definitely improve. First thing is the humility. Humility means that one should not be anxious to have the satisfaction of being honored by the others. I am at peace. This kind of thing should be within himself, that I am at peace. Whatever I'm doing in my aura, outside the aura, I should not concern. In today's materialistic world, people at the hierarchy expect every time that he should be honored. But one who had grown up with the spirituality or with the spiritual education will never mind of this kind of thing. Self-control. It is given in only a single slide, but this single word can write a whole book. It is a very wide topic, self-control. So many examples that we are having, that what is the self-control. The person will not be too greedy to acquire things that not necessary for him. Here we are talking about the necessity. We are not talking about the comfortability. There is a vast difference between the necessity and the comfortability. Here in our materialistic world, we are always asking for comfort zone. But it can be done by the necessity also. If I can say very simple example, if we are traveling by any four-wheelers, in the second seat, the seats behind the driver's seat, if we are traveling or we are sitting at three people, it can consider as a necessary driving or is a necessity. But we are asking for comfort. So most of the people wants that we should go, or we should only two people in their seat of a three-seater seat. So that is a comfort. And there is no end of comfort. And there is no end of being or having comfort and reach and this and this and that. But the person who is having its own necessity, all the necessary things, that person have to be stopped. Then also, again I am quoting this sentence, person will not be too greedy to acquire things not necessary for him, and he will not react but respond to adverse situations after deliberate thinking. One thing that I am always quoting, that don't give your instant reaction. Don't give your instant reaction. So self-control is a very, very important phenomena of today's materialistic world. Even-mindedness.
Dear sir, we have a little bit timing coming to the end of our session, so could we round up? Yeah, so round up.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just 1 or 2 minutes. How to imbibe spiritual educations? Exposing the students to studies of scriptures like Vedas, Bhagavad Gitas, etc. Yogas and meditations, prayers, traveling to the places of spiritual importance, personal mentorship from the spiritual guides. Still, where I want to say so many things, but time doesn't permit. So next time, whenever we will meet, we will discuss so many other things. Thank you for giving this kind of things.
Thank you very much for your elaborate and detailed presentation. We can stop your projection. 1 second.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Because we have still time for questions and answer sessions, and you may address those issues and those topics in this session. So people have some questions here in Q&A box. So you can also inquire for yourself what questions we have, and I will read them out for you and will ask you to answer. Sir, according to your knowledge, who started Hinduism? I guess it is to David Frawley. Yeah, you have to unmute yourself there.
Hinduism, as Sanatana Dharma, is the tradition of eternal truth, knowledge, reality. It is said that it comes from Lord Brahma as the creative power behind the universe. It is said to manifest from Omkara, the source of all vibration, knowledge, light, sound, life in the universe. So it doesn't have a founder. It's also said that the Hinduism is manifest anew in every yuga, in every loka, and it has its own exponents there accordingly. And I would also like to say that Hinduism is not simply the oldest religion in the world or oldest spiritual tradition, it's also the newest. And the reason for that is it asks us to go to the teachings of contemporary teachers and gurus, and ultimately also to find the truth within ourselves at every moment in our daily lives, from waking, dream, deep sleep to every aspect of our consciousness. Hari Om.
Thank you. And that's what it means, Sanatana Dharma. It's ever new and ever old, like the dawn in the Veda, yes? She's Purani and she's Yuvati Purani. She's always young and ancient. Beautiful. Thank you, David. There is another question. What are the first steps for someone starting a journey in meditation and spirituality? What would be the first steps? Who would like to answer this? Please. It's a question to everyone.
Yeah, I would like to answer these questions.
Yes, please, Janak.
Yeah, the first step towards the spiritual education is, according to myself, you have to be a good human. You have to be an emotional person. You should be 100% with yourself. You should be able to understand the society's need and be with them, be the part of the society. If you could succeed these 2, 3, 4 pillars, then your journey will start. It is, you can consider the prerequisite conditions for starting the spiritual educations. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. There is one more question. Divine wisdom has transplanted a small percentage of population from the Indian subcontinent to US and Europe. How will this influence spread of spiritual vidya in these countries? I guess that would be to David Frawley again.
Yes, we have now the Hindu diaspora, and Hindus are among the most affluent and educated and peaceful people in all the countries they've gone to. They've contributed to the social welfare, to education, and to spirituality. We have magnificent Hindu temples now in cities throughout the world, particularly the many Swaminarayan temples, such as we have at Akshardham in Delhi. We also have those throughout. And they're also then bringing education, a sadhana, they're bringing their gurus over, and they're linking with the already existent Western community that since Vivekananda has taken up aspects of yoga, Ayurveda, and brought yogic teachings, and also art, spirituality, all the aspects of the culture. So they are coming together as well. And the community that's not connected to that has to see how successful, happy, helpful the Hindu community is. And that's also changing them. I remember a few years ago, I was talking to some people in Canada, and they said when the Swaminarayan put up their temple on the way to the airport, that totally changed their view of Hindus in Canada. And now we have Hindus in all educational fields, spokespersons in medicine, science, and all the rest. So it has made a great difference. And of course, much more needs to be done. When you see anti-Hindu or anti-views in Western media, which does occur, you should remember that that's a temporary backlash. Some of these people are now seeing this, how this community has flourished, calls into question their values, but that is a sidelight. The actual teachings, presence, power of the Hindu community and the yoga community overall is growing. Hari Om.
Thank you very much. There is a question about Aurobindo children. I do not know who would like to answer this. Ameeta, maybe you. In the present day, how are children in Aurobindo introduced to spiritual education? Can it be shared widely to outside of Aurobindo? So, I'm not sure. Well, maybe I could answer because I was Aurobillian for 27 years. So, and I taught in all the schools, and I must tell you that there is a big struggle in the schools to establish that education. We have beautiful examples from the past and present. Last School is one of those. Future School is another one, another attempt to bring these ideas into action. And my daughter was in Miramukhi School. There was an old school created by French community. And when the school was closed, my daughter was already like 13. She was crying. She said she had nowhere to go. You know, this is the school where, which is right school. That's how we have to build the schools. That children want to go there because that is their home. That is their expansion of their being, where they can feel at home and learn. How it is projected to the bigger world, it's very difficult to say. Most probably it's still on this stage of experimentation within our Aurobindo community. Though children from the Aurobindo and Aurobillian schools, they are doing very well in the world in spite of having no papers for finishing education and formal papers. Yeah? The same with the ashram school. There is more question here. The Purusha aspect needs to be brought into the pedagogy where one can experientially discover this aspect in one's being. How do we introduce so that Annamaya, Pranamaya, Manomaya Purusha can be discovered in the practices in the school education? This is number one. And the second, learning by identity is another approach to enter into the essence of any matter. What can be the process for it? These are very complex questions and require elaborate thinking. Would you like to answer, Aravindan Neelakandan? Some of them at least. Yes, please.
I'll take the first question about Purusha. And when you think of introducing Purusha to the child, we are talking about a kind of an intelligent principle here. Now, naturally, our mind goes to the Sankhya Darshana, where we talk about the Purusha and the Prakriti. And usually, when a child grows, when it looks at the natural world around it, a very easy way, I would say a pedagogic tool, for it to understand the world around it is to say that, okay, this has been created around it. By whom? By a Purusha, by an intelligent being has created this around it. And so naturally, the child looks for the mechanisms through which the Purusha has created this. But as the child grows, it meets Darwin in the curriculum. And then the watchmaker god dies actually. Now you have to come to the god of the lens grinder, I mean the god of Spinoza. So you move from that to this, and in this particular transition, you can now introduce the concept of Purusha and Prakriti together and say that they reflect upon each other. It is a kind of a co-creation. What is happening is not an intelligent design, but an intelligent design like from being imposed from above, and it is something that grows from within. And from mechanisms, the child can now be led to processes, identify the processes where the child saw in chlorophyll a kind of a machine that captured light. Now it can see a process, a dance. So that way, you actually, this is not an easy task. It is not an easy task. You have to sit and you have to design this curriculum in a very intelligent manner. People who are into science and people who are into spirituality in a very proper and the deepest sense of the word, they have to sit together and they have to create this curriculum and present it to the child. And it has to be a spiral curriculum from the first standard till it goes and on and on. It has to understand its understanding of a phenomenon has to expand with itself. That way you have to create this particular curriculum. And it is a very big challenge. I think that is a very good question. It is again a springboard from where we can jump into a beautiful way of looking at things.
Thank you, Aravindan. David Frawley, would you like to add to it? This is, I think, your question, actually, for you.
Yes. I'm reminded of Vedas and Upanishads. Take the child out into nature, first of all. And Purusha Vedam Sarvam. Purusha is everything. And a verse from Upanishads, Yo Sao Aditye Purusha Soham Asmi. That Purusha, which is light, consciousness, being, the cosmic person, which dwells in the sun, I am that. Teach that to the child. And let us remember Sri Aurobindo's idea of the supramental yoga and the sun. Hari Om.
Thank you. So there are more questions here, but our time is running out, and I want to take one shorter one and more kind of to the point. What is the relation between science and religion? It's a big question, but just in few thoughts. Aravindan already mentioned this, and David Frawley was talking about this. What is the connection between science and religion, or science and spirituality? How could we envision it in the future? Or maybe difference between religion and spirituality has to be also defined first. Who would like to address this?
Well, if people aren't making a statement, I will say something.
Yes, please.
Religion has something that's coming to us from certain religious traditions. Science, it's curious, Veda is conceptualized as knowledge, as science, not so much as religion or belief. Yoga is a science of consciousness. So we must see the difference here. And basically, Upanishads teach the outer vidyas and the inner vidyas. Outer vidyas are based upon name, form, and number. Inner vidya is based upon akshara, the eternal, the infinite, the unlimited. So these are the two vidyas. They are different in some ways, science and spirituality, but they also overlap in many ways. So spirituality goes back to the Atma Vidya, science is the knowledge of the outer, but science then takes us to the knowledge of the inner through the science of consciousness. And spirituality takes us to the knowledge of the outer through its understanding of the bhutas, the gunas, the karmas involved. And we can have a wonderful cosmology of consciousness uniting science and spirituality. And I think that's what we're going to come to through the marriage of the deepest level of physics and the deepest cosmology of consciousness. Hari Om.
Thank you very much. There are more provoking questions which I would love to avoid here about the expenditure of and so on and so forth, and the difference between different institutions, because they are not essential for now. Then nobody is very much different from others. These are the attempts to build up. Still, they are at the preliminary, the beginning stage. And there's much to do to really achieve some higher results. So to criticize anybody's attempt or that it is not successful, it makes no sense to me. So I would skip this last question from anonymous attendee. And still it's an anonymous attendee, so anyway, if it would be a name, I would address this issue, but otherwise I would rather skip it. Thank you. Thank you everyone for this beautiful panel. It is really worth having. Today, on the day of Aurobindo's birthday, the birthday of a new city, which will bring the light of the supramental on earth to India. Indian knowledge will shine again, will be recaptured in a new manner, and will bring it to the world. And today I would like us to finish with meditation, short meditation, 5 minutes,